Joining me now, Mark Medina, NBA insider, has covered the league for a very long time. Hey, Mark, thanks for spending a couple minutes.
Hey, thanks for having me. It should be a fun NBA Finals.
I'm not sure it's the finals that anybody expected, but maybe Jimmy Butler. But here we are. What are your sort of big picture takeaways from the Celtics Game 7 collapse?
Well, there's a bunch of things. One, Jason Tatum's injury on the very first play of the game with his left ankle significantly affected his game, but Jaylen Brown did not take the full mantle of being the number one guy and carrying the team, going 1 of 9 from the field. I think from a big picture perspective, it was, I think, disappointing and for a Celtics fan to see them not really take advantage of the moment, with the fact that they were able to overcome an 0-3 series deficit, force a Game 7 at home before a really raucous crowd. So while the Miami Heat certainly give a lot of credit or deserve a lot of credit for their resiliency and their talent and experience, it just feels like that Game 7 encapsulated the Celtics' entire season of them not playing up to their full potential and just being very inconsistent along the way.
Yeah, the Jekyll and Hyde sort of analogy comes to mind for me, because I was talking with longtime Celtics insider Dan Shaughnessy here a couple of weeks ago when they were in this 0-3 hole. And I said, I don't see a reason why, with how talented this team is, they couldn't claw back into this series and force a Game 7 and potentially win it. He wasn't quite as sold because of the fact that you never really seemed to know which version of this team was going to show up. And, for those that were kind of pushing home court advantage as a major advantage, you had Erik Spoelstra coaching the Heat to the point where it didn't seem like it mattered at all. I mean, how much credit does Erik Spoelstra deserve, and where do you rank him in the pantheon of coaches in terms of getting this Heat team ready to play them in that environment?
Yeah, Erik Spoelstra is one of the best coaches in the NBA, and he's certainly been one of the longest tenured since being a head coach since 2008. And so I think that his experience with being at the NBA Finals 5 times, winning 2 championships, also experiencing shortcomings on his own, definitely shaped him from that for that moment. I think what really struck out to me about Erik Spoelstra with how he handled Game 7 was his demeanor following the Game 6 loss. His public messaging was about, the fact that the Heat has gone through ups and downs during the entire season. They'll embrace this as an opportunity. He also stressed almost the enthusiasm that he wants to play this game pretty quickly. And so I think that messaging had a trickle down effect with the rest of the team. And no doubt it helps that they have Jimmy Butler, they have Bam Adebayo, they have a lot of great depth that fulfill positional needs, but their makeup and DNA really embodies the personality of the coach. And so I think when you see how resilient and hardworking the Miami Heat are, it's a direct reflection of how Erik Spoelstra manages the group.
And before we move on and get into the finals matchup, what do we know right now about what this Celtics team is going to look like next season?
Well, every NBA offseason is an element of an unknown, but I sense that they're going to look at about running things back as opposed to, making any major changes. I mean, the reality is Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum have had a lot of success with getting to the NBA Finals last season and being in a lot of Eastern Conference Finals ever since they paired together. Joe Mazzulla, first-year head coach, had some different ups and downs, but I think we have to keep in mind that this was a Brad Stevens hire. He had familiarity with Joe Mazzulla working on his own coaching staff. And so this isn't one of those situations where there could be changes because of a new front office or new ownership. There is more of an investment in seeing Joe Mazzulla build off his first season. So certainly there's going to be salary cap questions that they have to answer, most notably about Jaylen Brown's extension that he's going to be eligible for. But if I had to guess, I think they take care of that extension. They run the most of the roster back. They keep Joe Mazzulla. And if there are problems that come up later next season, they'll deal with them as they come. I sense that they feel that if they preemptively make changes now, it would just exacerbate existing problems and it create new ones.
It's interesting to hear you say that, Mark, because I think you're the first one that I've heard so far that is making a case for this group to remain intact. I mean, if you listen to Celtics fans, they want to absolutely rip it apart. Jaylen Brown is to blame. Joe Mazzulla is to blame. Brad Stevens is to blame. I mean, watching some of the news reporters go out there and cover the Celtics fan base reaction to the Game 7 collapse was hilarious in and of itself, just spending so much time working in that market and just knowing how that fan base wants repercussions, wants damages, wants payment for being let down in such a profound way. But if Joe Mazzulla is going to make it through this and stick around, I'm curious what you think about who he is and whether or not he truly has the ear of the locker room. I was fascinated by the way that he handled post-game reaction to the Game 7 loss. He was really terse. He didn't offer much. And then he was quick to really pivot to the macro sort of story about losing a game as big as this, and mentioning that there are so many other things that matter so much more than basketball. It kind of reminded me a little bit of Kyrie Irving, just in the way that he pivots away from the game and tries to draw attention to the larger picture, which is, hey guys, this is just a game sort of a thing. I don't know if that's fair or not. That's just kind of something that came to my mind. But all that to say, what kind of guy is he? And is he the best fit for this Celtics locker room if they keep this together?
Yeah, it's very fair questions. And when I'm talking about the commentary about it, they're better off, keeping things intact moving forward. That's not to say that any party is above criticism. I mean, the reality is they didn't win a championship, and they were expected to do so after making the finals. And so, as it pertains to Joe Mazzulla, you saw a lot of ups and downs. You saw, some learning curves with just how he gets guys ready to play, the game plan that they give the players, his X's and O's, how he handles rotations, how quickly he calls timeouts. Now, when you look at the micro of the Eastern Conference Finals, he did course correct enough to be able to help the Celtics overcome that 0-3 series deficit by addressing all of those things that I mentioned. But that's not to say that he's a finished product by any means. And I think that one of the low-hanging fruit solutions to keep an eye on is how he handles his assistant coaching staff, because ever since Ime Udoka's departure, there were also a lot of departures of other veteran head coaching voices that could have been helpful for a first-year head coach. And so I would suspect that both the Celtics front office and Joe Mazzulla himself would find it very helpful to add veteran voices around him to help mitigate some of those learning curves. Just a point of reference, you look at Steve Kerr when he was a first-year head coach, even though he obviously knew the game as a former player and being connected to the game as a broadcaster, he made it a point to hire veteran assistant coaches around him, most namely Ron Adams, so that he could fill in some of his blind spots. So I think that's, example number one of changes to see. And then it's all about using this past season as a learning opportunity and course correcting and improving from within, knowing what worked, what didn't, and then trying to become the best version of himself. And look, it's professional sports. Coaches are evaluated on bottom line results. So if at some point the results aren't there, changes might happen. But I suspect that the Celtics are going to give him those opportunities to see if he can improve from within before making any drastic changes.
Are those veterans out there, those coaches, those voices that could come in and offer a little bit of guidance? Is there anybody that comes to mind that you think might be the right fit? And do they have to come from, do they have to have a connective thread to the Celtics organization? Could it be somebody from way outside that's sort of a veteran voice in the league that might be helpful?
Yeah, well, philosophically, coaches lean on people that they know, whether it's people that they're close with or mentors. And when you're looking at the coaching landscape itself, I think that the dominoes and the game of musical chairs have to sort out with the head coaching vacancies. But if there are situations where one of the elite head coaches winds up not having a job, right, like a Doc Rivers, a Mike Budenholzer, Frank Vogel has not had a head coaching position yet since the Lakers let him go last season. Any of those kind of coaches can really help, be a mentor. Now, I think that philosophically speaking, not, specific speaking here, there is sometimes a push and pull with a coach's comfort level and having some of those established coaches, because sometimes you do wonder, okay, am I keeping this seat warm for this person to replace me? So a lot of times I think that there's a value in finding a mentor that maybe might not have the end goal of being a head coach, and using Steve Kerr as an example. Again, Rod Adams has been in the league for a while now, and he no longer had any interest in becoming a head coach. So with all that, there's no candidate X per se that comes to mind, but it's certainly something that both Joe Mazzulla and the Celtics front office will need to explore on how they beef up their coaching staff moving forward.
Yeah, that is a really interesting point. And if you could get a guy like a Doc Rivers, who has been there, has won championships, and who maybe, I mean, I can't read his mind, but maybe doesn't want the full pressure of a full-time head coaching job anymore. Maybe that is the solution. That's really interesting. Just one last quick point on the Celtics, and then we'll move on, because I don't want to keep you for an eternity. The fact that Brown, Tatum, Marcus Smart, all these guys who are no longer rookies. I mean, these guys have been together for quite a while, and the expectations have been high that this team is equipped to win a championship for quite a while. We saw them go through defensive lapses, and maybe Mazzulla was helpful in sort of sorting that out and putting those pieces back together. But all the missed threes, the fact that they're not sharing the basketball, that they make bad decisions offensively, who is ultimately to blame for some of this hero ball that we saw that clearly didn't benefit them?
Well, when you look at the who to blame, no one's ever blameless. But I think the challenge in professional sports is how do you divide the percentage blame pie, right? I think that it starts with the players, but also it starts with a coach that enables that to happen. And I think the ironic part, when we're focusing specifically on their offensive discipline with their shot selection as well as their defensive lapses, they had shown throughout the season that they could play at an elite level on both ends of the floor. And offensively, during a lot of stretches in the regular season, they were one of the best offensive teams. And what's really interesting is when this past season happened with the coaching changes, with Ime Udoka being let go and Joe Mazzulla then taking the head coaching position, there was a little bit of an identity shift where last season it was mostly defense first, offense second. And here the offense was primarily first, but that came from a good place because their efficiency was off the charts. Their ball movement was off the charts. And so they had a good sample size of playing the right way, having good ball movement. Obviously, Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown being the offensive focal points, but resisting the urge to go ISO hero ball, as you mentioned. And then, as you mentioned, during critical points, whether it's regular season games, playoff games, Game 7, they go back to their worst instincts. And the same idea applied to the defensive end of the floor. I mean, the bottom line is this. For the most part, this is the same roster that appeared in the NBA Finals last season. And I would also argue that's even better because they made, some, additions with getting Malcolm Brogdon, for example. So we've seen enough of a sample size and perspective that they are capable of doing this, whether it's with Ime Udoka or Joe Mazzulla on the sideline. But the inconsistency for this type of team to show is maddening because of the talent level, because of the experience. But that being said, even though they have a lot of experience, the reality is Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown and Marcus Smart, they're still young players. They're still in the prime of their careers or entering the prime of their careers. So they certainly have the capability to continue to improve. So I think because of that, it goes back to my earlier point that it's probably too early to break it up right now. But going forward, there's only going to be so much patience for these kind of things to persist.
I was going to say for whatever it's worth, and I don't, I'm not in the mindset of the player, so I don't know what it's worth. It's going to take some really serious discipline and consistency, I think, to change the minds of some of the fans who just feel so let down by such a talented group. But I don't know if that ultimately matters. And I know winning is probably the cure all for everything. That being said, I appreciate the insight there because I think we'll learn more in the next weeks and months about what this what this squad is going to look like moving forward. And the coaching piece is really interesting. Jimmy Butler to me is fascinating. He's such a likable character in all of this. The way that he has sort of manifested this and promised this and said, you got to fail the test until you pass it, sort of a thing. I think he has emerged as such a likable character here for those who maybe weren't quite as familiar with who he is. When you look at this NBA Finals matchup, then the rest versus rust sort of piece of this, let's start there. You've got this incredibly talented Denver squad that's been laid off for 2 weeks, really. Does it benefit Miami to have this momentum to just bulldoze their way into these finals, or do you think that this is not going to be an issue for Denver picking up where they left off?
Yeah, this is the ultimate old age question, and really it always plays both ways. So, not to cop out of the answer, but we'll know when the game starts. But I think that if I had to handicap it, I would give the benefit of the doubt to the rest part with Denver because they had significant time to sit. They hadn't played, I believe, since Game 4 against the Lakers about 12 days ago. So that was a significant amount of time. They also have had no injuries since the playoffs started, where with the Heat, Tyler Hero's already been ruled out of Game 1. He's missed the past 17 games because of his broken right hand. Gabe Vincent's been dealing with some ankle injuries. Same with Jimmy Butler. They're both expected to play, and they're downplaying that, but they're entering a series without fully feeling healthy. That being said, if I had to rank rust versus rest in that element in the series, I think ultimately it's going to come down to the team's talent, depth, coaching. But look, when you're talking to the NBA Finals, every factor matters. And especially when it's a Game 1 of the Heat wanting to have an opportunity to steal one on the road to set the tone, or the Nuggets vice versa to set that tone on their home floor. Maybe that is a predominant theme specifically in Game 1. So be interesting to see. I give the handicap to the Nuggets, but really NBA history shows that when it comes to this debate, it's really flip a coin and circumstantial.
Yeah, it's interesting. I could kind of see it going two ways. I could see them running into an absolute brick wall in Denver, and this thing is over 4, or I could see this sort of magical 8th seed storyline continuing where Spoelstra gets them to a place mentally where they can take on this team that's got incredible talent. And I don't, similar to Game 7, I really of the Eastern Conference Finals, I really don't have a feel for which way it's going to go yet. And I don't know if anybody really does, just because we haven't seen Denver in so long. But when you look at the rosters, how do these two teams match up, and which matchups in particular do you think could be really pivotal moving forward in the finals?
Well, I think that both teams are really great. They both have a great identity of a combination of star players, role players that know what their strengths are and they do them well, and really good coaching. But I think the Nuggets have the clear advantage from both a health standpoint and personnel standpoint. And so when you look at them, on paper, there's no weaknesses on their team. They have, two-time MVP with Nikola Jokic. She can really do it all offensively. Defensively might be a relative weakness, but they have a lot of defensive reinforcements, most notably with Aaron Gordon. They have a lot of good perimeter defenders with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and Bruce Brown. And then on the other side of the coin, offensively, Jamal Murray has shown that now that he's fully healthy, that he could be an all-star point guard next season. Michael Porter Jr., now that he's fully healthy, he's shown that he is the real deal when it comes to being a blossoming young star that can play on both ends of the floor. And they've had this great synergy about them where they know that obviously the offense runs through Nikola Jokic, but there's really no, personality or role conflicts when it comes to how everyone falls in line. And so I think with that, the ultimate matchup is going to be about Nikola Jokic. He's already broken Wilt Chamberlain's triple-double record in postseason play. He has 8 so far, presumably counting. So how do you contain him? And I think that it'll start with Bam Adebayo, who's a great defender. He can defend at all 5 positions. He's very versatile, very physical. But what do the Miami Heat do other than that, as far as throwing other bodies, throwing other zone defenses? And the danger that the Miami Heat are very well aware of is that if you put so much attention on Nikola Jokic, he's just going to punish you in other ways. He's one of the best passers in the NBA, the best passing big man in the NBA, and he has the personnel that can really punish you with open threes or Jamal Murray running pick and roll. And so it is that ultimate cat and mouse game of how do you limit Nikola Jokic, but not at the expense of him making everyone else better around him on the floor.
Is there any weakness outside of Jokic and sort of what he brings to the table? That aside, is there any other sort of weakness that you see with Denver that Miami could exploit? I mean, from what you're describing, it seems like they have consistency. They have a loaded roster top to bottom. They've got the MVP. You know, if Miami were to make this a series, outside of containing Jokic and Bam having a huge series and some of these other players giving him help, is there anything that Spoelstra will try to do in terms of exploiting weaknesses on Denver's side?
Well, look, Eric Spoelstra and Michael Malone know much more of the intricacies than me, but just as an NBA observer, I don't see any fundamental weaknesses that the Nuggets have. But what the Heat can do is just rely on their own talent and depth and just their competitive spirit. And you just never know in a playoff series. Maybe that can wear the other team out. If they can do things to help Nikola Jokic get in foul trouble or Jamal Murray, that certainly, sometimes played a factor when the Lakers were playing against them. But ultimately, they wound up getting swept anyway, so it was almost a non-issue. So, yeah, if I had to make a prediction, I think that the Nuggets are going to win this series in 6 games, but I would be very surprised that the Heat wind up getting swept. They're not a number 8 seed on paper. They're a number 8 seed because of circumstances with a very good Eastern Conference landscape, as well as different overlapping injuries throughout the season. But what they've shown in the playoffs is they're much better than that, and I think that they'll have the resiliency and I think the experience to be able to weather any adversity when it comes to Nikola Jokic's dominance or Denver's dominance overall. And they're going to continue to compete. And so with that, expect Miami to put up a good fight. And with that, that's often half the battle. So should be a fun matchup, to say the least.
It's great stuff, Mark. Just real quick before I let you go, which off-season sort of moves have you been most intrigued by? I know Detroit's making some changes. We're starting to see the coaching carousel go around a little bit. I mean, what has stood out to you so far?
Well, the coaching carousel is certainly interesting. Nick Nurse getting hired by the Sixers and Monty Williams taking a very lucrative deal with the Detroit Pistons. And we'll see how some of the other head coaching vacancies play out with the Phoenix Suns, Milwaukee Bucks. But I think there are 2 off-season storylines already that really piqued my interest. LeBron James heading at retirement. Now, as soon as he hinted at that, people around him told me that they don't think he's going anywhere. He's going to honor the last 2 years of his contract. But given LeBron James's magnitude of his career, his importance to the Lakers, and what it means for the offseason, it's certainly an interesting storyline. And I think the other storyline that has real tangible effects is Bob Myers deciding to step down as the Warriors general manager. I mean, obviously, when you look at the Warriors' history and their success with winning championships, I'm losing count here, 4 NBA titles out of 6 finals appearances, I believe. It obviously starts with Steph Curry and the talent that they've had around Steph with Kevin Durant, and then obviously Klay Thompson, Draymond Green around him, and then a bunch of really good role players in Steve Kerr. But Bob Myers has had his hands in a lot of those major pivot points when it came to negotiating Steph Curry's contract at a discounted rate, being a part of drafting Draymond Green, getting Andre Iguodala in free agency, convincing Kevin Durant to come and also having the salary cap space to get him. And look, there's been hits and misses when it comes to the NBA draft that the Warriors have participated in. James Wiseman comes to mind. Jordan Poole comes to mind. But the reality is a general manager's job is primarily about managing everything. And Bob Myers mastered that to a T with formulating a lot of great relationships with the players as well with Steve Kerr. And while there's always that healthy separation between church and state when it comes to the front office and the locker room, because at the end of the day, sometimes they have to make tough decisions about cutting players, trading players, not re-signing players. He's had really good professional relationships with all of them. And you just wonder, as much as the Warriors have tried to construct this moving forward with potentially having elevated roles for Mike Dunleavy and Kirk Lacob, can they bridge that gap with having the same kind of relationship capital in certain pivot points, most notably with Draymond Green potentially opting out of his player option this summer Klay Thompson hoping to have an extension. And look, maybe these are non-issues. Draymond Green either opts into his contract or is willing to take, a team-friendly deal to stay put. Klay Thompson still has 1 year left on his contract, but there is definitely a fork of the road feeling that while this isn't the end of the Warriors dynasty as we know it, that's not going to happen until Steph Curry is no longer on the roster. It certainly is a fork in the road that's going to test the Warriors' ability to be able to go down the right path.
And I imagine Bob Myers would have a long line of teams lining up for him if he decided that he did want to step back into this arena. From everything I've read, it sounds like he's stepping away, that it was his choice. I imagine it's a job where the burnout is very real. Maybe he just wants to refocus or reset. Do you have any sense of why the decision was made, or whether or not Bob Myers might at some point decide to start a dynasty elsewhere?
Yeah, well, look, Bob Myers and Joe Lacob, addressed the media earlier this week and explained from their point of view why things didn't work out the way you would think about Bob Myers continuing to stay. Bob Myers stressed that it wasn't about the money, that the Warriors gave him various lucrative offers that would ensure that he was still one of the highest paid executives in the league, if not the highest. And even though we're dealing with first world problems, when it comes to feeling appreciated, that can go a long way. I think that, Bob Myers also doesn't take for granted that he had a good thing going to be able to work with people like Steph Curry and Steve Kerr on a continual basis. And as much of a demanding owner that Joe Lacob can be, the reality is he also walks the walk. He's willing to spend. He has given the team a lot of resources to be competitive. It's very well run. And so I think when you add all these things up, certainly there might be different layers to this, but the surface level layer, I do believe that ultimately Bob Myers wound up getting burned out by the job. And some of that is by extension of working for a demanding owner, but it's not so much of Joe Lacob ran him out. It was the demanding expectations that have accumulated over the years of being part of so many championship runs, as well as managing a lot of tough moments, whether it's Draymond Green with the officials, or Draymond Green's punch with Jordan Poole at the beginning of training camp, or handling, Kevin Durant's arrival and handling his free agency exit, and all the criticism that Kevin Durant received throughout his time with joining a team that had already won a championship prior to his arrival, and what that means for a superstar's legacy. He was always managing those things behind the scenes. And so it is a 24/7 job. Not, every GM has a 24/7 job, but when you add the elements that made the Warriors franchise unique, you multiply that by who knows what number. And so with that, he's certainly going to get a lot of offers. He's certainly going to get a lot of interest. I am curious to the LA Clippers, especially because they lost Michael Winger to the Washington Wizards, so they go after him. I'm certain that a lot of teams will go after Bob Myers, but I think the good thing that Bob Myers has is that he has a reputation, he has a resume, so he can certainly make the choice to use this year to recharge the batteries, spend time with family, maybe dap into the media space before committing to something long term. But if he also wants to jump right back into it, he certainly won't have a lack of options to choose from.
Mark Medina, thank you so much for joining us. I know I kept you for far too long, but I appreciate the insight. It's going to be a fascinating offseason and hopefully a really good NBA Finals if Miami can make a series of this thing. Thanks so much for your time.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.